Hello, my name is Judy Williams. I'm a lifelong Winnipegger. My great-great-grandmother came to Winnipeg with her family in 1905 and settled here. My father came from Trinidad to Canada in 1949 to study as a student at the University of Manitoba. After the passing of our parents, we went through their belongings and we found so many historical documents, photographs, items that we just knew we needed to do something with them to keep them safe and preserve them. And talking with other people in Winnipeg, it seemed to be the same story. They had heirlooms from their family members as well. And that's the basis of the museum project. So February 1st was our founding meeting where 27 people gathered and we discussed this idea of having a space to share the Canadian experience for Black families. From then we met a few more times and we've decided on a few core directives for this space. We named our organization Black Heritage Experience Manitoba. And the three main principles we're looking at right now are the importance of honoring our past, celebrating our present, and building the future. Our mission is to create a living, evolving space that centers the words, the truths, and experiences of Canadians of African descent and the wider African diaspora in Manitoba. We seek to foster community, celebrate resilience and excellence, and promote education for justice and joy across generations. So as we gather here today in this historic building, originally built in 1912 as the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, and now the Millennium Center, we invite you to imagine what our future space might look like. This exhibit you are about to experience offers just a glimpse of what the Black Heritage Experience Museum will become. But more important than what you will see here today, we want you to leave with one simple message: we exist. We were here when this bank was built in 1912. We walked down Bankers Row and did our banking here. We were part of the city then, and we're part of the city now. We are storytellers, and today we invite you to listen. This inaugural exhibit will explore the story of migration with our theme, Across the Ocean to Canada. You will hear drums and songs that carry messages of freedom. You will see quilts and historic documents that led to liberation. And you will trace the journeys of the ships that carried enslaved Africans from the 1400s to the 1800s, and hear stories of resilience, enslavement, and survival. We invite you to sit and watch a short video featuring members of our organization sharing why we formed and why this is so vital. Learn about early Black settlements in both Eastern and Western Canada, and above all this, know we have always been part of this history. We also want to extend a heartfelt thanks to Cindy Tugwell, Executive Director of Heritage Winnipeg, for sharing our vision and providing this space and opportunity to be at Doors Open Winnipeg today. To our members and volunteers and to every visitor here, thank you. Please take your time to explore, ask questions, and stay a while. We hope you enjoy this first chapter in our journey. Thank you.
I was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. And I've been in Canada, Winnipeg here for 44 years now. I have my 4 children here, and I feel it's very important that they know our history and our background. So that's why this drives me into being a part of this program. Besides that, I'm part of the African communities of Manitoba here in Winnipeg. I sit as Executive Director for ACOMI, African Communities of Manitoba. And this is something that is of great interest to us. So personally, this is a great value to me and to my work and to the people of African communities and people of African heritage. So that is why, another reason why this, this lines up with my values. because we need to tell our own stories. Our stories have been told by different people for many years now. My children need to know their background, their history, their tradition, and the values that it brings. It is very important for us to know. I've realized that I'm not going to take them back home. This is their home. Yeah. This is the place they've known. And this is Canada for all of us. But they still need to know our traditions. Some of them are very simple, but they are very important. Our history and people who fought for us from colonial rule, they need to know all that. And they need to also know that we stand on the shoulders of these very important people, trailblazers, who have brought us this far. So this is the main reason why I'm very interested to be a part of this program.
Hi, I'm Lauren Turney. I was born and raised in Winnipeg. My family is Williams family. My grandfather is Lee Williams. He was a CN, he worked for the CN. He started the movement to get equal job rights for the Black sleeping car porters. My mother is Valerie Williams. She continues to do anti-racism work. She started at the University of Manitoba doing equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I feel like it's in my DNA to continue on to promote Black culture, to preserve Black culture, to educate and to promote learning and education within our community, within the broader community. I feel that growing up in Winnipeg and going to school, we didn't learn about slavery in Canada. The Canadian government does a very good job of, burying that history. And, I've had to do a lot of my own work and research to understand where we come from, our roots. I would like to go back and learn, where my family originated from. Both my grandparents' families were enslaved in the United States and Texas. Beyond that, I don't know where we came from, so that's something I'm also interested in.
Ready? Thank you. My name is Carl. You are going to soon realize I'm from Jamaica. It's my favorite language, especially when I'm annoyed. And I grew up in Jamaica, then came to Canada, really. I've been here for a number of years. And I want to tell you a short little story. A few years ago, well, it's now about 30 years ago, a cousin of mine from Jamaica, she's now in Australia, she wrote a family history of my mother's family. And I realized for the first time that I have Black ancestors. And if you have Black ancestors from Jamaica, at that time, they were slaves. I didn't know this before. I may have guessed it, looking around at people, but I didn't know it. And it brought home to me this idea that, you live among people, you know nice people, and you realize they don't have a history. What a horrible thing to think about, no story from the people that you know. Now, I don't know if that's what motivated me, but I decided to study history as a youngster. I have taught Black history, I have taught West Indian history, and I'm now professor of Latin American history, which I've been for a few years, and realized one of the values that my parents gave to us as children was a very strong sense of justice. And you realize that when people are left without a history, that there's a huge injustice there, a tremendous injustice, which needs to be righted. I don't know if that's the motivation why I'm here. I think I'm here because I think I'm doing something which is right, and which is interesting, I must tell you, very interesting, to be able to use the skills that I have learned as a professor, as a historian. Because, historians we're obsessed with one thing. We're obsessed with truth. You can't be a historian if you don't want to tell the truth. And truth is something which is inclusive. It can't be exclusive. It has to be inclusive of everything, or else it's not really truth. And I find that working on a museum. And I tell you this other little story. I've taught high school in Canada, in Manitoba. And the other day I was looking at some of the textbooks that were officially used in the school. You will not find the word black in the textbook. It doesn't exist. There are a lot of other people, but not black people. And what a tremendous injustice that is. What a lie. So with those feelings, and that was very strong feelings for me to be able to work in a project where I can right something which was wrong in the first place.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Kathy Atwell. I'm Judy's and James' sister. This all kind of started, when we were going through our parents, we were cleaning out our parents' home, and we came across a lot of the memorabilia from our great-grandparents. And we were talking about it, as Judy had mentioned before, and we thought it'd be great to be able to capture it in lots of different ways. And there's so many Black experiences in Winnipeg, so it's really great to have all the different communities here and come together to do this, because to experience it, having everybody have their own voice is absolutely wonderful.
Hi, my name is Ralph Bryant, and I've been really moved by the last few folks, because I think it's got me thinking a lot about why I'm here and what personal values drive me to this work. We're at this moment, an interesting moment in a time talking about history, where Jackie Robinson's name could be erased out of history books a couple days ago. And there are a lot of ways to think about that, but one thing for Black folks for all of us to think about, but for Black folks especially, we understand this idea of erasure. We understand what it feels like, for centuries to be in places where there are people who want our sweat and want our labor, but don't want our presence. And so, and I think about Judy talking about being able to talk about and reflect on 8 generations of her story, and sit here in this flesh and bones and not be able to think about 1 generation of my story, and not be able to understand the history and tradition and the things that ground us in our people and our families in the way that so many of you are able to do. One of the things that I found interesting when I first moved here is that the first few people I met in Winnipeg, Black folks that I met in Winnipeg, asked me who my family was. And that is a question that is very common for someone who you don't know to ask, because so much of this community is rooted in history and whose daddy know whose mama and whose auntie went to that party in 1975. And it's a beautiful thing to experience. It's and a sad thing for me. And so I think that, and it's taken me a long time in this body to appreciate how important that is.
Story and different things, but my vision to see this museum would be something in the line of, I don't know if you guys been to Lower Fort Garry, and you see where they had, in the old days, they'll have somebody dress up like a governor, and they'll have a piano, and they'll show, some, like what really happened. They'll have a guy who was a blacksmith, and he would be showing how things were done in the old days. I would like to see something like that with this museum, of where we have little excerpts of people picking cotton, people cutting cane, people doing, the gold mines in South Africa. That's a place I've been to. I've been to Sierra Leone. And by the way, my whole vision of Sierra Leone is that my uncle, who was living in England at the time, and my mother's brother, he said his grandfather told him that he was he was 14 years old in Sierra Leone when he was picked up on the beach and put onto this boat and took into the Caribbean. Now when this boat reached, I think they said it was about some distance away from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, this boat went aground, and all the slaves who was captured on that boat, some of them drowned, some of them was managed to be saved by the Aboriginal people and was taken to the island, and they hide up in the mountains. And that was one of the stories how the Sierra Leone part come in.
My name is Precious Goche. My family is the Lanes and Mays. I'm just going to go through the questions. So my passion for this work comes from understanding that the archival process is colonial and wanting to see a counter-archive from Black voices. Also, many of us don't know each other, don't know our history, things like that. For myself, for example, I'm almost 40 and I grew up not knowing family or a lot of where we came from. And I think it's important that the next generations don't experience that they don't have to learn it at school. That's another thing that I don't agree with. I think that part of what separates us is that we aren't transferring this over to the next generation.
Hi, my name is Selena Clemens. My family names are Clemens and Cromwell. I was born and raised in Winnipeg with my 6 siblings, and my parents are from Nova Scotia. I have a big family in Nova Scotia. My dad came here from the railroad in the late 40s, and I'm interested in this work because I think it needs to give voice. I think sometimes our voices are sequestered, although within the family and talking within the community, within the Black church, in the North End community, we always had voice. Because there was always stories, there was always family, there was always connection. But as time goes on and we, lose our family and lose our elders, those voices and those stories, they're not told as much. And the opportunity during those times when I was growing up, when there was pockets of resources in the sense of telling stories, or there was youth groups, once that ended, where were those stories? Where were they documented? Where could they go? They were within us or within the elders or with our aunties or uncles. And that's diminished over the years. In growing up, when I was a youth in the 70s, we had an elder, which is probably your great-grandfather, Mr. Phillips. And we used to meet at the Wilson's basement, the Wilson family. And Jimmy Wilson and Donnie Morrell, they were our peers, our elders that we looked up to. And at that time when we met there, because we didn't have a place to go as teenagers, we would hang out, we would go to the church, Pilgrim Baptist Church, CBS Hall, where we would have our dance group there on Thursdays, because dancing and music was a big part of our youth growing up. So we'd always find a place or a pod to do our thing. But what they were talking about was because in the North End at that time, if 5 or more gathered, they considered us a gang, or there was troublemakers, I remember one time walking through the park, and there was about 10 of us just walking through the park, and this group, they proceeded to, the N-word with us. Long story short, it ended up a story on the radio that we were the aggressors. We were just walking through the park, minding our own business. And so Donnie and Jimmy Wilson and Donnie Morrell at that time, they were meeting with Gramps, Mr. Phillips, and Mrs. Geraldine Wilson, and they were talking about getting a center together, a group, the possibilities of that. Long story short, I mean, one thing, we had our dance group, so we used to dance. We would dance all the time at different centers, and we ended up, it wasn't just the dance group, it's just that became our kind of base, you know, and our name was Afro-Canadian Youth. So it took about 2 years. We were meeting on a regular basis, and, you know, as teenagers, you know, trying to gather ourselves together, you know, and meet so that we could get a grant, and we did get a grant. And at that time, we had Afro-Canadian Youth, and we had an Afro-Canadian Youth Center, and it was in downtown Winnipeg. And we taught with June Harris. She was a jazz musician. She taught music, and we had an African drummer. They taught Swahili, basketball, and of course our dance group. And I find for the youth today, they need to find voice, that their voice is important and that they are connected. Because when we had that, you know, 2 years to get this Afro-Canadian Youth Center, in 6 months, it was gone. And it was so heartbreaking, all the work that we put into it. In 6 months, it was gone. And I find that history is starting to erase. We're disappearing, our history, because it's like, you know, where was it? Where is it? I found our history is connection, because we connect to all members of the community, you know, our community. And I think it's important to give voice to that, give recognition to that, and give connection to that. And if that is one of the main purposes of the Black Cultural Center that they're trying to build, I think that's very important, because it's going to stand and it's going to have voice. And the youth are going to know that we're all connected, because they're the next generation coming up, and it can't disappear.
Having grown up in a, like, almost, how can you say, one racial identity, I told my boss when I came here, I didn't experience overt racism until I got here. When crossing Portage Street and a bunch of yahoos yelled, "Go back home." Things like that. Sending my little daughter to daycare, and she coming home with food in her hair, food stains in her hair, and asked the care workers, like, "Why does she come home looking like that?" So they said, "We don't know how to wash her hair." And I said, "Really?" So that's the thing. So my first experiences were here, and I would wish that those types of questions would not be asked of future parents, and that this museum would contribute to pride in themselves, just like for Corona, and the other associations where we gather together as a group and we feel so warm and welcome, that others would experience the same as we have.
It's interesting that you were talking about, you know, your daughter when she was younger and the whole hair experience, because I remember, I mean, we grew up in St. Norbert, so we were probably, there's only 2 Black families in St. Norbert at the time. And we had some good experiences. I was the youngest, so it was a little bit different for me because I had older siblings that came before me who experienced a lot more things than I did. So as I was growing up, they kind of paved the way for me. But I remember being in grade 2, and one of the teachers kept saying how cute I was, and we were sitting around with a bunch of the girls from the school, and she's like, "Oh, look at your hair, look at your hair." And all the little girls in school started touching my hair. And it's really amazing how they never made you realize that, how that makes you feel so different. And it's like, you just made me feel different, and I didn't know what it was because you're only 7 years old. So, you know, this is good for people to hear, and, you know, nowadays you can actually defend yourself and say, stop. But at that time, at 7, I didn't know what to do. So, yeah, really, it's that experience. I've had that years and years ago, and it's amazing that your daughter had it as like later on in life, and people are probably still experiencing it. I had a lady the other day who, she came up to me and she's going to touch my hair once again, and I'm backing up, and it's like she realized, like, okay, she stopped, but it's people just don't realize, like, I don't touch you. Why are you touching me? Stop touching me.
And going forward, coming to Winnipeg, I encountered two racism things that I think that's about the two that one was when I first came, I was in Montreal for about a year. As a matter of fact, Air Canada was the one that brought me to Canada, because I came to Expo to be with the guys with the steel drums and so on. When I went back, they offered me a job if I wanted to work in Canada. And I was in Montreal for a year and then switched working through Winnipeg back and forth with Air Canada. When I did that, after I get tired of every 3 months moving back and forth, I quit and I went to a company called Bristol Aerospace. I worked there for about 3 years, and the job I did was, I had my pilot license, and my job was to bring detonated planes that were damaged from Vietnam coming to Montreal, and my job would be to fly those planes from Montreal to Winnipeg. Some of them had bullet holes, the wings were dilapidated, they were pretty bad. I ended up having ulcers and stressed out over that. So I quit that job and I went into, since I was a musician, I formed a band and traveled across Canada for about 3 years, playing music and so on. And being involved with different history and the things that take place. I encountered one day, I was going to Red River College taking some courses, and I remember traveling down Waverly one day, and I just got my license, just got a car, and a cop was on the other side of the street, pulls me over. So I didn't know the rules at that time, so I got out of my car as he crossed the street, and as he saw me get out the car, the guy panicked and he was, get back in the car, get back in the car. He holds his gun out and he was having a heart attack. I guess he probably hasn't seen a black person or whatever. I don't know what his problem was, but the guy went nuts, and his partner who came across the street and had to cool him down, calm him. He says, look, just go, just leave. And I took off and left them without any no ticket or nothing happened there. My life. The next incident I had is, as years goes by, I was a supervisor at Flyer Industry. I was in charge of like 200 workers at the Fort Garry plant and worked there. After about 10, 15 years, I think, the company was sold to a Dutch company, and they laid off all the workers, most of the workers, especially supervisors and stuff. And I started a restaurant on Pembina Highway, which is now like where Bishop Grandin was. In those days, there was no Bishop Grandin road like that. So I was, I had it for about 3 years, and then they decided to close the mall, and I moved to St. Norbert. That's what I'm saying, like the family in St. Norbert. I remember meeting Mr. Atwell. As a matter of fact, when I bought a second house in St. Norbert, he was the one that took me and sold me the house. He was doing real estate at the time. But I moved my restaurant from that mall and moved to St. Norbert. There's a little strip mall in St. Norbert, not too far from where the St. Norbert market is. And I was very happy and proud to see that, I'm going to open up this Caribbean restaurant in the mall. So I had everything all set up for the first month. And one day I came to check the week before I opened up, and all my signs were broken, all the windows were busted up. There was graffiti signs, the N-word and different things written on the wall. And I thought myself, like, what's going on with this community? Like, I'm very disappointed in what's happening here. So I phoned the cops, and they, we don't have time for that. Phone your insurance company straight. And I said, well, this is ridiculous. And there was a guy who we all know at one time he used to be a very controversial guy, a guy by the name of Wade Williams. He came up and he looked at what happened, and I don't know what he did, but all of a sudden there was newspaper, the police, everybody. That news got all over Canada of what happened to my restaurant, just by him saying something. And, although he was a controversial guy that I know had, issues and so on, but some things he did was really effective and promisable.
And we've always encouraged our children to know who they are, where they are from, and that they are valued. I know the strength of our people. Having grown up in almost, how can you say, one racial identity.
But when I think about my legacy, I think about my two sons, who are fantastic and extraordinary in every way possible, except they really do not understand that life existed before 1990. Right? They just have no grounding in their personal history, because I don't have that grounding, and they don't have, aside from like the ones we know and the Black History Month kind of stuff we know, I have not done a good enough job of grounding them in their history across the Middle Passage. And so the legacy that I hope to leave from this work is exciting them about that history. And I thank Judy and for the opportunity to be of service.
The experience that I have that influences me since I've been in Canada, I've been part of the African community Fokorama. I've had all my children participate, and I've participated since the inception of the Africa Pavilion. I performed, I contribute, I volunteer, I have been a part of the kitchen, like coordinator for the kitchen, co-coordinator for the kitchen for the past almost 25 years now, which I still do. So I love culture, and I want everybody to be involved in it. So,
Hi, my name is Emma Bobby. I'm with the Kenyan Association of Manitoba. I moved to Manitoba as a student in 1985 and completed in 87, immigrated in towards the end of 88. My work is in natural resources management. I ended up working for Manitoba Hydro for about 29 years, and recently retired. The personal values that drive me are having been a child. I was born during the liberation struggle, colonial liberation struggle of my country to free themselves from colonialism in the 50s. And you won't believe it, I remember a time when we had been moved from our traditional lands and placed in a reserve. They had built outposts on hilltops where they could observe you day and night. You had a curfew. Could only work. My parents could only work on their farm until a certain time of the day. And so I remember us as little kids walking from school, going first to meet my mom on the farm, and then picking up the youngest children and walking home alone, and having to start the fire and start dinner before they came home. And so my younger brother, I think he had some issue because he'd be crying the whole time until my mom came home. So it's hard for me to explain these things to my children as they were growing up, and because there were gaps even for us as kids of families in that era. So my motivation and the reason I see this work as important is for each one of us and our children to know our history and why we have become who we are now. I want them to have pride, and I've always, my husband worked a long time in this type of work during his time in Winnipeg. He's still here. He joined the anti-apartheid divestment movement, and we've always encouraged our children to know who they are, where they're from, and that they are valued.
And so I think the personal value that brings me to this work is reconciliation. And that is personal reconciliation and I think a desire to want to make sure that we are able to capture and honor tradition moving forward. And I want to be able to ground my personal history in the history of our people. In terms of what experiences influenced my decision, so most people, I've been in Winnipeg for almost 2 years, and most people that I meet, I introduce myself as a filmmaker and a writer, and I'm definitely a writer, and I've been working on this documentary about mental health and the legacy of institutional and scientific racism on our community, but specifically impacting black men and centering my family's 3-generation history of being hospitalized and understanding how there's a societal story to play as it relates to scientific racism that impacted that.
Okay, my name is Errol Joe Collins. I was born in Trinidad and Tobago. Growing up as a kid, I really didn't know much of the racial problems and what really took place in my life as those days. I, as a kid, remembering a picture in my bedroom with my grandmother, which I grew up with. And this picture was 2 white people, a man and a woman. And one day I asked my grandma, well, who's these white people? She said, those are my mom and dad. And of course, as a kid, it didn't mean anything to me. I never really looked at it as any kind of a difference in how I was growing up. But as time goes by, and when I was about 17, I leave school, playing the steel drums and getting into my mom had moved to England, and by this time, by 17 years, they sent for me and I moved and went to live in England. Living in England, I went back to school. I went to the University of London, which in those days was called City College, and I studied engineering, and I worked with the different companies. I worked with the Ford Motor Company, I worked with the Air Canada, and by this time I played music, I did boxing, I got into all kinds of, you name it, I think I had taken part in all these different activities and entrepreneur and stuff like this. As a matter of fact, I became a professional boxer and had the opportunity to spar with Muhammad Ali when he was in England for a fight with a guy by the name of, can't remember his name, but I had the opportunity to spar with him at that time. Now I got involved in England, which then I found out about the dislike of racism take place and this, the Notting Hill riot. I remember these, that was one of the reasons why I got into boxing, was to defend myself, because there was kids who called themselves skinheads and teddy boys, and these kind of people were the ones who were trying to beat you up or chase you around and stuff like this. And that's why I got into this. During that time in England too, I met a lot of guys who had recently go to England because the first steel band was played at a concert in England, and I wasn't part of it, but some of the guys who went there, they never went back to Trinidad, they decided to stay in England. And meeting one of the guys by the name of Gerald Forsyth, I remember the school, my sister was going to this school, and they wanted to have the steel band in the school. Gerald Forsyth was one of the guys who get involved in making the steel drums. So I brought him to the school, talked to the people and so on, and we were able to put one steel band together in that school. And from that school on, when I left England, there were 500 schools that had their own steel drums. And today, there's over 5,000 schools in England that has steel drums. And one of the things that I did here, some Black history, was what we call tambu bambu. Now this was an instrument when, during slavery, the drums were taken away from the Africans, slaves and so on, and they had to find a different way to get an instrument. So they used bamboo, they get bamboo, different size of bamboo, it was cut to different size, and by hitting it on the ground and beating on the side, these drums used to send messages, and this bamboo would do the same thing. You use the bamboo to send messages and so on like this. I hope my story is not too long. I just want to give you some ideas of what it's all about. So by doing this, we have all the different sizes of bamboo that could use and send messages and stuff like that. And another thing that we used for sending messages to was, in the Americas, they used tap dancing. A lot of people think tap dance was just a way of instrument, like entertainment, but it was also a way of sending messages so that the slave masters didn't understand what was going on. And these things were also used in the underground and different ways of getting people to, run away from slavery and stuff like this.
I believe that this process and this work is going to also be moved into academia, somewhere that we don't have a lot of information. Right now I'm a cultural studies student, and I am moving into my PhD in September, and I find it very difficult to find a lot of our history, or if it is, it's like just little bits. And so I think that something that's central and vast is going to be amazing. So that's all I have to add. Thank you.
I think my role in the work, well, I want, I've done oral histories. We had to do oral histories when we were interviewing the porters. I went to Nova Scotia. My sister went to Vancouver. And it was a really big project. Even at the museum, when they got it started, it was just part of the story, and we felt that there was a broader story. They were just focusing on one of the porters, and we thought that it was important to talk about the community and the families. And what I find, even in school at university, I took urban and inner city studies. When they're talking about the North End community, I always found I would interject about our families living in the community and take pause, because I felt that it was always deleted. And there was a large Black community in the North End, and it was disappearing. I wasn't seeing it. And so I gave voice to that so that the other students can ask the questions about it, because it was never there, Or, as I said, that information, it just dissipated, or, it got spread out, or it got diluted. And you wonder, where's this information from smaller projects that were ongoing but never sustaining? You got to have that sustainability. So this is the time to have that sustainability, to have that history, to give voice, and also, I think, very important to show connection between family and between our cultures, because we are connected. When I was a youth, I played steel drum. I was 15, my sisters played steel drum. Got involved with carnival because I knew that was part of my culture. I was raised here, my parents from Nova Scotia, but when I was able to connect with someone like Joe and other people in the Caribbean community, that this is what I wanted to learn, and because it has a history to it. And so those connections, I feel, are important. Our stories are important. As a community are important. And our legacy is that we're all connected. And I think that has to continue and sustain itself. Thank you.
My role, what I think I can contribute. I can contribute my presence, my energy, my thoughts, and a few things that I have. I was in Edmonton just 3 days ago. I arrived midnight just last night, and I visited Edmonton Art Gallery. It is very nice. There is one Black guy who has his painting posted there. It's on display. And I thought that is very beautiful. The first picture that attracted me, or the painting that attracted me, is a picture of Viola. Yes. It is very nice, and the story that it tells. And their gallery is so beautiful. I started to think and envision how ours will be. So I'm very excited to be a part of this group. Thank you.
Doing what I can contribute is my time, my knowledge, and experience. I'm a social worker, so I have done quite a bit of time, work interviewing people. So I'm working on the co-chair for the oral history. Judy and we took the course at the UW for oral history, and I'm really excited to working with all of the Black communities, African, Caribbean, Canadian, American, and coming together and working together. And I feel that growing up, we were kind of on our own, and now I think there's a move into coming together and working together, and just acknowledging that we all come from the same place in one way or another. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and this project is, it's going to be a lot of work, but I feel that it's going to be worth it, and yeah, so thank you.
And I think I bring some skills as a historian Because, we love to dig. We love to dig in the most dusty piles of things to find out something that nobody else knew. And I love doing that. It's a good feeling of accomplishment. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm here, to help with the project. And I wish everybody here all the success as we go forward in what we're doing. It's a very worthwhile project. Needs to be done. Thank you, Judy.
What I wish to contribute, like Maggie, is my energy and my enthusiasm. I'm a close friend of Judy's, and we've worked together on some other community improvement projects, and yeah, that's what I would like to bring. I'm excited, and I'm hopeful that this would be a long-term project.
But I feel kind of like that guy in the movie Taken who doesn't talk about his like other skills. And so before I was a filmmaker, for decades I was a sales, marketing, and brand strategist, and I worked for the NBA. I worked for Estee Lauder and a bunch of other places. So I bring to this work, and I run a small agency called the Black Misfit Society. We do ideation, creation, and event management, event marketing. We put together a project called the Love Notes campaign last year, which put up 200 words of affirmation centered around mental health and healing all over the city. And we'll be doing that again this year in partnership with CMHA and Art City and a bunch of other folks. So I bring all of those decades of experience in working in public and private sector to this work. What do I think about my role and legacy? So for me, this is I think my role is to be of service in any way that I can in any way that the collective needs me to.
My name is David Rose. I came to Winnipeg January 25th, 1962. I have two sisters that were living here, and they were telling me that here is very cold, but life is better here than Jamaica. My first experience was, wow, how comes people live into this cold place? And as the second week comes around, I said, well, I'm not going to live here. I'm not going to stay here. I am going to work, save my money for about 5 years, and then go back to Jamaica, and I'm going to buy a Bedford truck. And either if I stay in St. Thomas, I will use the truck to draw sugar cane from the farmers around to the sugar factory, which is at the time Surge Island Estate, and I probably could do a good living and just use the truck to be a business and stuff like that. So I have plans not to stay here more than 5 years. After 3 years, I went back to Jamaica and I married a beautiful young lady, which is today my wife. Yes, 60 years. And she came up, we started having children. I came to the decision that Canada would be a better place to raise a family than Jamaica. In the States, you could tell that you're not wanted because the white people there was plain in their racial behavior. I remember when my wife came and we were looking for an apartment. We saw this place advertised and we thought we would go and check it out. And so we phoned, and the lady who answered the phone said, yeah, it's still vacant. My wife and I, we went, and soon as she opened the door, we said, we're here to look at the apartment that, oh, you're just about 2 or 3 hours late. We just rented it. We were so sad. So we went down the street, and that time you could put the 10 cents in a payphone machine, and we phoned the same number. The same lady answered, and we said, I kind of changed my voice and says, you have an apartment there for rent? And she says, yes. Couldn't we come and look at it? Yes. I says, woman, we were just there. And you said it went into, and the phone went cling. Black History Month is reminding us about our heritage and where we come from. A lot of people don't know that I was living in Brooklyn, New York. Oh, I just said that to you. While I was there, my two brother-in-laws and their cousin, about 2 weeks after I went there on one of these march. All over New York, they were all marching to Times Square. I think it was 64. Yes. They come and they get me and says, you're new here, man. This is a good experience for you. And so I was in one of those marches, marching for freedom. And we went to Times Square. There was a little guy, he was short and skinny, and he was a writer. I don't remember his name, but he was one of the keynote speakers when we got there.
James Baldwin?
We got it right on top. I remember him too also getting into a debate in London, England. He made some remarks about James Baldwin from the ghetto. Should be very fortunate that he is now lecturing in a university. What he was really doing, he was really criticizing James Baldwin. When James Baldwin get up to speak, he was so eloquent. He says, my distinguished something another was born in affluence and with a gold spoon, would you say, in his mouth. But it is true that I was a shoe shine boy, shining shoes on the street for $1. But today I am lecturing in the same university alongside my distinguished whatever it was. And who achieved more? The one who is born with the gold spoon in his mouth, or me, who was coming from the ghetto, as he calls it, is today lecturing alongside him in the same university. And the student body, they stood up and they began to cheer and clap and things like that. Man, I'm telling you, that was something. James Baldwin really did put him in his place. But I guess maybe you want me to tell a story about this time I went for employment. I was laid off from where I was working, and I was really looking for a job. I was home for about 3 weeks not working. And this Saturday I was looking in the Free Press, and I saw that the CP, Canadian Pacific Railway, they were advertising for welders and saying that first come first and they need. Monday morning I was there, and it was about 8 of us. And as I get out of my car in the parking lot, another guy pull up, said, we start talking, and white guy, he said he's responding to the ad for welders. And I said, me too, you know. And so we walk in and we shook hands and said, good luck. And then the supervisor came in and he greeted us, and he set us all up with the welding plates and welding machine. We all get 3 plates to do. We have to do the flat, we have to do the horizontal and the overhead. And he was gone for a while, and then he came back, and he didn't break the plates, which normally that's what they do. They bend them to break to see if they break or whatever, what penetration and how solid it was done. He just looked at the welding and all the guys passed except me. He looked at mine and he says, "Sorry, you didn't pass." And I knew because we were finished and all looking at each other's job, and I know I passed when I saw what some of the guys did. Well, just as I had in my wallet a CWB. CWB means Canadian Welding Bureau, which is required for the job that they were going to do. And I also have a high pressure ticket because I went to Red River and redo a welding course to get certified for the CWB and the high pressure ticket. And he looked at them and he says, "You have a CWB ticket?" So yeah. "And you also have a high pressure ticket. How did you fail?" "I don't know." So he said to me, "Okay, take a plate from there and go and do it. Just do the vertical." And he said to the rest of guys, "Come with me to the office." Well, I did the plate and I was mad, so it wasn't nothing like the one I did before. I was mad because I knew that he failed me on purpose. He came back. He never even looked at the plate. He says, "Oh, that's much better. Come with me to the office." I love Jamaica. It is probably one of the most beautiful countries on the face of the earth. It has a very rich history, from Marcus Garvey to my area of the island where I'm from, in St. Thomas. I don't know if you know about the Marant Bay Rebellion, but that's not the reason. Because the beaches are beyond measure, beyond beauty. And the food, Jamaica, the way they cook, the spices that they use is made up of Chinese, African, East Indian, and maybe some more within there. And when they season their meat and all that stuff, and the beaches, when you go there, and most of the people are really friendly. So Jamaica is all that. But the opportunities to excel as a poor boy back then wasn't there. And I still go back and see a lot of people who have the ability to learn and excel, don't have the opportunities. But I love children and I have 5 of them. Canada has given me an opportunity to do hard work and excel.
The Black Loyalists are our ancestors. Formerly free Africans, they were enslaved and taken by force to the Americas. Most worked on plantations, cultivating and growing staple crops from which the wealth of nations grew. Without the tragic history of the transatlantic slave trade, there would be no Black Loyalists. Enslaved people were considered personal property or objects. Dehumanized by a system of forced labor, they were often subjected to violence and cruelty at the hands of their enslavers. American colonists were fed up with the British government for imposing taxes and laws that negatively affected them. Freedom, liberty, equality, and justice was the goal, but not for enslaved people. Talk of liberty and equality filled the homes, town halls, and streets of colonial America. The message of freedom spoke to the heart of enslaved Africans. It would be the British, however, desperate to teach the American rebels a lesson, who would offer freedom at a cost. Desert your masters, fight for the British king, and you would have your freedom. Black Loyalists participated in the war in various ways. They gathered intelligence, acted as guides, built fortifications, provided service to officers, engaged in armed combat, and acted as messengers. Their numbers included skilled artisans, tailors, cooks, sailors, and musicians. New York was the last British stronghold to the north during the war. Here gathered Loyalists, both black and white, who could no longer stay in the newly formed United States. For our Black Loyalist ancestors, this was a time of fear and uncertainty. American enslavers were entering New York to claim those they had previously enslaved. Over 2,800 Black Loyalists, their names recorded in the Book of Negroes, would depart from New York for Nova Scotia and other parts of the world. Many of our Black Loyalist ancestors had certificates of freedom from the British. Others were still enslaved. They had been captured by British forces or purchased by officers or were forcibly accompanying their Loyalist owners into exile from the war with the Americans. A large group of our Black Loyalist ancestors landed at Port Roseway, soon after renamed Shelburne at the southwest corner of Nova Scotia. Most of our ancestors lived in a community of their own called Birchtown. Located about 5 kilometers northwest of Shelburne, Birchtown was the largest free settlement of Africans in North America and a place of refuge for people of African descent escaping enslavement and difficult living conditions. Nova Scotia was not prepared for the arrival of so many people and could not provide adequate resources. Many arrived late in the fall and had no opportunity to clear land, build a home, or plant crops. They spent the winter in tents and makeshift huts in the thick woods. Others built pit homes, holes dug in the ground with a roof overhead. When the British government failed to fulfill the promises of land and a better life, the Black Loyalists turned to their community leaders. These leaders petitioned the government on behalf of their communities. Less than 10 years after they first arrived in Nova Scotia, many of our Black Loyalist ancestors had given up hope of fair treatment and were ready to leave. Many took the risk of an uncertain future in the hopes of providing a better life for their families. An overwhelming number of those who were free to go left. They went to Sierra Leone, and upon reaching Sierra Leone, the Nova Scotia Black Loyalists founded Freetown. The population of Birchtown shrank with the migration to Sierra Leone. Even so, those who remained formed the basis of the Black Nova Scotian population of today. Employment in the nearby town of Shelburne led many families to relocate in later years. Birchtown remained a small rural community of a few hundred who practiced farming, fishing, and forestry. We needed a place to safeguard our heritage. We needed a place for our community to gather. We needed a place where our visitors are welcome and where they can learn about our stories. It was a long time coming, but through the hard work and dedication of many supporters, we finally have a place of our own. It is a proud symbol of struggle by Black people everywhere for justice and dignity.
How did anybody scrape an existence between those rocks?
The Black Loyalists really were having a real tough time of it.
During Black History Month, Canadians might hear about the Black Loyalists, Black soldiers who sided with the British during the American Revolution and found refuge here, settling in Nova Scotia. What we don't often hear about is how those Loyalists faced terrible conditions and that many of them left Canada for greener pastures in Africa. CBC's Kimberly Gale tells us about one Canadian who is living that history and connecting with a past across 2 continents.
The British post them all Canada in the province of Nova Scotia. Na 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 na.
You look around and you don't see anything that says there were Black Loyalists that were here who got on board 15 ships and settled across the ocean. It's amazing. It's a story that needs to be told.
This is Wayne Hamilton's story, one of searching for his roots. 2 centuries ago, Hamilton's ancestors came to Nova Scotia in search of freedom.
My sense is that after 3 or 4 years, the Black Loyalists really were having a real tough time of it.
So hundreds of former slaves made another journey, this time to Africa.
Some families probably were separated because maybe the brother didn't want to go, but one brother did.
And that was the Hamilton family's fate. Wayne heads up a government agency that works to promote African heritage, a part of Nova Scotia's history not always told. As a child, Wayne remembers his mother telling him he had a rich heritage of his own.
The pyramids. Did you know Egypt is in Africa, not in the Middle East? And that when we talk about greatness of kings and queens, that's part of your lineage.
But the Nova Scotia condition was not better for them at all.
Second day landing, somebody says, Hamilton. It was an older man, and he kind of like pointed a finger at me with, you must make sure that you talk to the Hamiltons because those are your people.
That's Wayne.
Wayne found his people in Sierra Leone, those ancestors who had left cold Canada and established Freetown.
I didn't even know who I was going to meet, but I started shouting, Wayne, Wayne, and he started shouting, Plumber, Plumber, and we bonded.
Uncle Plumber really looks like my Uncle Reginald Hamilton. That same kind of roundish colored face and that jovial kind of cheek and jowls.
You look at Wayne now, and when Plumber was a lot slimmer, then you knew, that's blood.
A connection spanning 2 centuries and 2 continents.
Their great-great-grandparent father stayed behind and ours came, and that's how we got the separation.
It was here in Birchtown Black Loyalists were promised land and settled. People here are working to preserve that story.
Once the largest settlement of liberated slaves outside of Africa, an unyielding coast where families were separated.
If you look around at the landscape outside, it's very rocky. And one would imagine how it did anybody scrape an existence between those rocks.
Inside this small museum is a copy of the famed Book of Negroes. Within it, the names of slaves who escaped to Canada. The Hamilton name is recorded here.
So here we have John Hamilton, who we know came on the ship L'Abondance, and they were headed to Port Mattoon, Nova Scotia. And he had a general birth certificate, which meant that he was a free man.
Free, but on unforgiving land. Many chose to leave, this time for Africa's shores. Today, Nova Scotia is putting more effort into honoring this part of its past. Federal funding was announced last year to expand the museum. In the meantime, the Hamiltons will try to complete their story.
I'm old now. I don't think I'll be able to go to Canada in the future. But if my children and grandchildren, they'll be going there, I hope.
I do see Sierra Leone as my second home, mostly because of all the relationships that I've been able to build up through that family connection called Hamilton. It's not finished, the journey is still on.
And by unearthing this past, a chance for others to begin seeking out their roots. Kimberly Gale, CBC News, Halifax.
There is something intangible about the places we gather. Over time, the walls of those places come to hold not just their inhabitants, but a kind of collective spirit, what historians might call collective memory, a way for people to relate, share, and remember their identity and their history. In a small town outside Halifax, Nova Scotia in 2011, a church was built in an attempt to be an exact replica of a church that once stood in the same spot over 40 years prior. But despite its architectural resemblance, this new church was empty of the collective memory that had filled its predecessor for over 100 years. Instead, it carried a new memory, that of racism, discrimination, and displacement. A memory of the town of Africville, which began as a settlement of newly free African Nova Scotians and persevered against all odds, and of Seaview African United Baptist Church that became the heart and soul of the town until one night the government bulldozed it down. After the American Revolution and the War of 1812, large groups of black settlers began coming to Nova Scotia, having been promised land and freedom. In most cases, that was technically true. However, because of racism, new black settlers were pushed to the fringes, forced to found new settlements on the most barren and undesirable tracts of land. One of those settlements was Africville, a small community founded on the outskirts of Halifax in 1836.
We all live in our own homes out here, detached homes, where our children can run around.
Africville existed in a strange limbo. The community was never really officially established. It was part of Richmond, but Halifax acted like it didn't exist. The town never received proper roads, health services, clean water, sewage treatments, street lamps, or electricity. Well contamination was so prominent that residents had to boil their water before cooking or drinking. Social services were just as bad. Up until 1933, Africville had never had a properly trained teacher. But due to rampant poverty, many parents had to keep their kids home from school anyways, so they could work or look after the other children. In Africville's first elementary school, of the 140 students registered, only 60 of them reached grade 7, and only 5 ever made it to grade 10. This was exacerbated by the fact that Halifax used Africville like a dumping ground, both literally and figuratively, for undesirable facilities. In 1958, they moved the landfill to Africville.
Where the pavement ended, Africville began. And where Africville ended, the city dump began.
I think the majority of the people from Africville felt the dump was a blessing, because through the dump, we were able to get the materials that we couldn't afford to buy.
It was sometime around Christmas when we picked up a newspaper. And in it was the story of a family in Africville that had been burning old car batteries which had been scavenged on the dump to keep them warm. And as a result of burning those batteries, the family was lead poisoned and had to be taken to the hospital. And I asked myself the question, God, what is this?
One bright spot of the community was the church. The church was the center of social life, the place of baptisms, weddings, and funerals. Other groups from across the area came to the church for Sunday picnics. What Africville lacked in amenities, it made up for in community. Yet, in spite of over a century of history, everything was about to change. The end of the 40s and into the 50s saw the post-war boom in Canada. Governments across the country began to enter a new stage of urban renewal. The sentiment spread across the country that people living in areas designated as slums could be relocated to improved housing.
To call this place a slum. It is. And who made it like that? The city is the cause of all of it.
Halifax City Council voted unanimously to adopt the relocation proposal. The relocation began in 1964.
The disappearance of Africville in the 1960s was attributed to urban renewal. It was a program which included wholesale rehousing and swept across Europe and North America. Urban renewal was intended to make things better and displace hundreds of thousands on both continents. Ultimately, it was clear it was a failure.
In a very real sense, the black people in the wider community of our province were not sensitive enough to unite, to come together, and to fight this blatant denial of people's human rights. That you could not think, that you could not make decisions, that we do all your decision making for you. And that was what happened in Africville. They went through the exercise of having meetings with the people there, but behind it all, decisions had already been made. That was prime land. That was important land. That this kind of land was not for the black people.
The city began approaching residents of Africville with offers to buy their homes. The problem was many of the residents of Africville lived in homes built by their ancestors. They had no deed, no paperwork of any kind proving that they owned the home. They never needed any. Out of all the residents of Africville, only 14 had clear legal title. For those without paperwork, the city offered $500, about $5,000 adjusted for inflation today, and promises of future allowances.
I remember the city saying to these people, if you're not over there, by the time the bulldozer gets finished with one home, then your home will be bulldozed over. You won't give the $500, you won't get the $500 the city is promising to give people. You won't get a home for a home, and we won't help you.
I remember trucks coming in. I remember Mrs. Mountley's house. Tore it down, never took a stitch of furniture, gave her time to take a stitch of furniture, order a home, and knocked it down. They bulldozed. Mr. James's store was in the hospital, Campbell Hospital, and they bulldozed the house down. The man didn't even know. He come out of the hospital and had no place to go.
And I remember my son coming home one night and he said, Mom, he said, the church is gone. This is about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, young people being out. And I said, oh, no. I said, it can't be. I said, it can't be. I said, no, Mom. He said, it's flat to the ground.
Still inside the church were vital records of birth, marriage, and death certificates that could have been used to establish chain of custody for land claims. Why were those documents still inside the church? After all, an official document shows that the city purchased the church in 1967, and based on their past history, the residents must have known the church was due to be demolished at any moment. The truth is, the city did not gain control of the church until 1968, and government officials doctored the documents to make it appear that demolishing the church was done lawfully. The last home in Africville was demolished on the 2nd of January 1970, but the destruction of the church was the unofficial end of the community.
They took our homes, they moved us out of Africville in the city garbage trucks. We had a lot better out there than some places they put us in this city. We haven't even got enough to put down one payment for a home. Nothing. I'm living on welfare. I think a whole lot of us, when we came in this city, we had to go on welfare. When we lived in that city of Africville, you look in the records and see how many Africville people had to humble and come to the city for welfare. We were too independent. We didn't want it. We earned our own living, and we earned it the honest way. Our boys never had so much trouble until they came in the city.
The city had lofty promises, but they did not come to fruition. In general, relocated residents had a higher cost of living and a higher unemployment rate. The government promised employment and education programs, but they were never implemented. Residents were relocated to community housing and promised social supports, but within 3 years, the city ended all social assistance programs designed to help the residents of Africville.
When you're in this country and you own a piece of property, you're not a second-class citizen. That's why my people own this land. They work for it, they toil for it, and they work to get this little piece of land that they own, and they try to hang on it. But when your land is being taken away from you and you ain't offered nothing, then you become a peasant in any man's country.
The spot where Africville stood also never lived up to the potential promised by the city. A highway was put through part of it, but surviving residents of Africville and their children never stopped protesting. As a result of the continued backlash in the 80s, the land where houses once stood and families made a life for themselves became a memorial park, preventing it from being developed. In 2002, Halifax Mayor Peter Kelly offered some money and land services to create a replica of the Seaview African United Baptist Church, and the site that once held Africville became a historic site that year. 8 years later, in 2010, Halifax offered an official apology as part of a $4.5 million compensation deal that included the church replica and a heritage museum.
On behalf of the Halifax Regional Municipality, I apologize to the former Africville residents and their descendants for what they have endured for almost 50 years. Ever since the loss of your community, which stood on the shores of Bedford Basin for some 150 years. You lost your homes, your church, all the places in which you gathered with your family and friends to share and mark the milestones of your lives. For all of that, we apologize. We realize words cannot undo what has been done, but we are profoundly sorry and apologize to each and every one of you. Our history cannot be rewritten, but thankfully, the future is a blank page. And starting today, we hold the pen for which we can write a shared tomorrow. It is in that spirit of respect and reconciliation that we ask for your forgiveness.
It's one of the nicest little communities I ever lived in. And to tell you something, I've been around this world twice. I've never met a place like Africville. Never.
But Mr. Steed, everybody thought it was such a bad place.
Who?
All the people who tore it down.
Oh, the people that tore it down. That's the people that tore it down, the city of Halifax, the authorities of the city of Halifax.
They said it was a bad place.
That's what they called it. But it was not to us, it was a heaven, a home, a real home.
My great-grandfather, Henry Sneed, is buried here. He died in 1914.
Ron Mapp has been to this spot many times growing up as a boy.
My grandmother is buried here.
His family goes back 6 generations in Alberta. It all started here in Amber Valley over 100 years ago, and it wasn't an easy journey.
My great-grandfather, Henry Sneed, led the original scouting party up here, along with 2 other scouts. They liked the land, and they decided to bring up the other families from Oklahoma.
Amber Valley was the largest and most prosperous black settlement west of Ontario. It had a school, a church, and a famous baseball team. Ron now lives in Edmonton and has 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren. While they didn't grow up in Amber Valley, the Mapp family history is something Ron has been passing along to his children for years.
I heard a lot of stories from my father and my uncle when I was young. I spent a lot of time in Amber Valley on the farm, sometimes weeks and months at a time.
While the Mapp family feels connected to its past in Alberta, it was a painful lesson for Mapp's great-grandfather, Henry Sneed, learning that Canada wasn't as welcoming as he'd hoped.
Growing up in USA and Texas and Oklahoma, going through Jim Crow and seeing all the racial discrimination, and to bring his family and other families up here, hoping that they wouldn't have to endure the same hardships.
Only 4 months after Henry Sneed settled in Alberta, Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier signed an order in council prohibiting black migration for 1 year, suggesting that Black people were deemed unsuitable to the climate and requirements of Canada. Within a year of this order, Black migration slowed almost to a halt across the country, contributing to a racist and isolating environment for Black Canadians who had already made their way here.
When the Canadian governments invited Americans, they didn't think that African Americans would answer the call, and they did.
Karina Vernon has been studying the history and impact of Black people on the prairies for decades.
They risked everything, moving across a border into a territory that they had no idea where they were coming. They'd heard that there was greater freedom under the Canadian flag. What they found was, of course, a mixture of freedom, but of also complications.
This year, Canada Post issued a stamp to honor Henry Sneed and Amber Valley. The stamp depicts Sneed standing tall along with other prominent community members of the time.
To take on such an endeavor to bring the families from Oklahoma up to Western Canada.
This is my grandfather.
Ron Mapp hopes his family's story and other Black families' legacy on the prairies will be taught in schools across the country to recognize their place in Canada. For now, though, Ron and his family continue to celebrate their roots.
Amber Valley is home. No matter where I go, Amber Valley will always be home.
Omaira Isa, CBC News, Amber Valley, Alberta.